Welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams-Birch, and this podcast, it exists for you. Whether you're a music lover, an educator, a choir member, each week we bring guests to the show to help explore what matters in music. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to the show. Hello, and welcome to the Music Ed Matters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Williams-Birch, and in this episode, you're going to hear from two guests. You get to meet Dr. Jerron Jorgensen and Dr. Christi McLain. They are married, and they have the coolest story, and we're going to talk about how they created a program to beat the odds. You are going to walk away from this one with ideas for how you can build relationships with your singers, with your students, how you can equip and empower your choirs and your classrooms, and so much more. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I can't wait for you to hear it. I'm also really thankful for the people at Kinnison Choral Company. Charlie and Carrie are so supportive of the Music Ed Matters podcast. Make sure as you're making all of your plans this fall that you jump over and check out their amazing rehearsal calculator and all of their resources. I love that their rehearsal tracks provide not just all the voices and all the different mixes to help your students engage and learn in new ways and build confidence in their part, but their musicality is gorgeous. And they have some really cool things coming out soon, so stay tuned. You can find out more from KCC by going to emilybirch.org/sponsors and clicking on the KCC, Kinnison Choral Company logo. Without further ado, my friends, Dr. Jerron Jorgensen and Dr. Christi McLain on Beating the Odds. Today on the Music Ed Matters podcast, we are welcoming husband and wife team, Dr. Jerron Jorgensen and Dr. Christi McLain. Hey, y'all.
Hello.
I'm so excited to see you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
You're so close, but yet so far away, right down the road in South Carolina.
It's true. You are near one of our very favorite cities, Savannah.
Yeah, I'm actually looking outside. I'm in Savannah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I work at a school closer to you than Savannah, I think.
Yes.
Aiken, but there's horses there. That's also beautiful. But yes, Savannah, it's gorgeous. Perfect time of year.
Yeah, before it gets too hot.
Yeah, before it's not hot yet. Thank goodness. It's getting there. But I love it. Tell the listeners, who are y'all? Where do you work? What do you do?
Yeah, so I am the director of choral activities at Coca University, which, as you alluded to, is not too far from Aiken, South Carolina. So it's in Hartsville, South Carolina, which is a small town in the PD. Coker is a private liberal arts university of about 1,200 students.
Yeah, and I am Dr. Christi McLain, as you mentioned, Jerron's wife, and I'm the voice area coordinator at Coker University, and I run our community music program, so I engage with our community quite often and our younger students. And I also we have a new opera initiative called Blueprint Project, where we bring in composers and librettists, and we develop new opera works.
That's cool.
Yeah, and engage our students and our alumni in creating new works. So kind of what we do. We feel like we do a little bit of everything because it's a small school, but
many hats. Yes. Many hats.
Is the school like the majority of the city? Is it like a legitimate college town?
It's not, historically, considering how long the institution's been around, you would expect it would be more ingrained in the community, but I think we're not that far from Columbia, so it's just a lot of USC and Clemson as I drive around town. It's hard to pry people from their Gamecocks and their Tigers.
Yes, it is very much a South Carolina thing. And how long have y'all been there?
This is coming up at the end of our fourth year.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Yes.
Okay, that's so exciting. Okay, I'm dying to know. You have to tell us. How did you guys meet?
Grad school
in a art song of Robert Schumann class.
Oh yeah, Professor Russell Ryan.
So romantic.
So romantic.
Shout out to Professor Russell Ryan.
Yeah. I was singing. There was a lesser known Schumann piece called the Liebeslied, and love song, and he was sitting next to a friend, and I sang it, and I heard him say, "Did you hear her decrescendo?" And I thought, oh, I need to get to know him.
That is a pickup line of all pickup lines. Did you
hear
her decrescendo? Write that one down, pick it up. Awesome. Okay, well, I love that you guys are working together. Let's unpack this. So this episode is coming out in July. And it'll be as everyone's kind of wrapping their head around the fall. And I think it's perfect because I saw y'all do a presentation twice now at NCCO and at the Chorosophy Con. And I love that what you have to talk about today is beating the odds, taking students who might not necessarily have all the tools and resources to succeed and equipping them and empowering them. Let's talk about it. How did you get into this whole idea of beating the odds?
Yeah, so it really started with my career. So when we were at Arizona State University, I was a football academics graduate assistant. So I worked with the most academically at-risk football student athletes. So these were kids that were really from underserved backgrounds. They didn't have really strong educational histories. They really didn't know how to survive in academia and in higher education. And they just really wanted to play football. And it was my job to make sure that they were on the field on Saturday, so making sure they were passing their classes and mentoring them and giving them the skills to be students, really. And so when we came here, Jerron had said he got the job first before I got my job. And he said, well, we're going to move to Hartsville, South Carolina. And I said, okay, tell me about this school. He goes, well, it's a lot of first generation college students. And I don't think I really knew what that meant truly. Then we moved to Connecticut and I worked with a whole different other type of student. And we kind of got into our first classes and I was starting to see these like connecting themes of our students had never taken applied lessons. They couldn't read music. They learned their audition materials from YouTube clips.
Right.
They have no foreign language skills.
And so many of them came from programs that would tell us, I said, tell me about your choir in your high school. What choir? Wait, your high school didn't have a choral program and now you want to be a Bachelor of Music Education major?
Yeah, and so I thought there's no way that these students are music majors. There's no way. And I thought, and then I immediately went to, this is like the same population that I worked with my football student athletes. And I graduated them on and they did such amazing work, like running for mayor of Compton and running their Boys and Girls Club. And, they got the skills that they needed and they graduated in 4 years. And I thought, you know what, we can take all of this stuff that I learned through the NCAA and we can transfer it to us. We can make it work.
Right. I mean, the NCAA has made such a, not a name for themselves, but really a sort of streamlined just supporting students that are traditionally considered at risk.
I love that we're talking about supporting the students and not changing the students, giving them the tools and not just spoon feeding them. So let's identify what are some of those areas that you felt you needed to equip them with? What were some of the skills they needed to learn to get to graduation?
Yeah, I mean, existing in higher ed, it's a lot of life skills, right? Functioning in higher ed requires things like discipline, time management, organization, self-motivation, and
self-efficacy, the belief that they actually can do hard things.
And like their access to technology, whether they have had much in their past or not, is a big factor. And so once you get to college, usually it's a great equalizer. Like, okay, wherever you were at school, now you're here and we expect you to know X, Y, and Z technologies. And so helping them also just function with basic technological competencies like Google Calendar, anything in the Google suite, iPads.
And then we have, music side of it, where just basic music literacy just is at the minimum for them. If they've ever seen music like sheet music before, or having ever really heard classical music before, because they're coming to school and they're not realizing that they're actually going to be studying classical music. And what does that mean? What does that sound like? It sounds so foreign to them. And sometimes when they do their first student recital and they come out and they sing Ca Romeo Ben, their families give them a hard time and say, what are you doing? I don't like the way you sound. I don't like what you're doing. So there's so many different levels to supporting these students that they have to overcome.
It sounds like there's like the organizational structure. What resources and tools do you need to succeed? The belief they can do it, the support system to do it. And then how do they even know what they don't know? That's something we talk about all the time in Introduction to Music Ed. We all are coming at this from an intrinsic motivation by music. That's why we are all music professors in that regard. So talk about your students when you met them for the first time and realized that they needed some extra scaffolding. What were some of the steps that you went through?
Well, I think the first thing is to identify, like you said, what don't they know, right? And so somehow we had to assess them and determine where they were at so that we could meet them where they were at. You could just assume that everyone comes in not knowing anything, right? But that's a lot of work, assuming that everyone's starting from ground zero. So instead, we decided maybe we should come up with a way of assessing them that was standardized, open, but also it was really important that it was voluntary, and we let the students know that we weren't trying to peg them as having any kind of faults, but just that this is a way for us to sort of get to know them, get to know what past experiences they've had, what skills they may or may not have, so that we can better support them in the 4 or 5 years that they're at our school.
And we also use this for inclusive pedagogy, find out people's pronouns and their preferred names, so it's kind of a way to support the students across the board, not just identifying our at-risk students.
Yeah.
So you created a questionnaire that asked the things that you needed to know. Because it was voluntary, did everyone do it? Did most everyone do it?
Everyone does it.
Yeah, we explained it to them that, we're using this to support you, to find the best practices to support you. Mm-hmm. And when we tell them the different levels of support they could receive, they're so eager and they're so nervous about entering into a program that they don't feel like they may be ready for. Mm-hmm. But they're so willing to be open. And oftentimes we put a paragraph, if there's anything you want us to know, and they divulge so much personal information. That's actually really helpful to us.
Mm-hmm. And that's so transferable no matter what level you teach, whether you're a community ensemble, you do little people, middle-aged, high school, giving that assessment, giving the space to get to know the students and what they need, and knowing that they don't all need the same thing, just like you said, they're not all at ground zero, but seeing where they all are.
Yes, and it gives them an opportunity to trust us. Right, to build that rapport with the students and for them to open up and trust. And I think throughout this process, as we get into, maybe some of the techniques we use, like motivational interviewing and how we speak with our students, trust-based relationship is so important.
That is so important. Tell me about these levels. You've mentioned that you have levels. So after the assessment, you put them into levels. What are these levels?
Yeah, it's just a really basic 3-tiered system, so low risk, medium risk, and high risk. And again, it's not that we're trying to label a student. It just gives us an idea of maybe this student is going to need more support or more scaffolding than this student over here. And that doesn't mean that we wouldn't make all of the things available to any student should they request it. But it just kind of helps us guide how we interact with the student and what we provide for them. So like a low risk student would be a student that said that they had like 2 to 4.
Yes. And they just may receive like twice a semester check-in, 5 or 10 minute check-in, or assist in setting some goals. And then we move into like a medium risk students where they have like 5 or 6 different qualifiers that we've identified as potentially at-risk qualifiers. And that student may receive, once a week study hall,
certainly more frequent. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we go into like our highest risk students where they're meeting with the pianist outside of class. They're meeting with tutors outside of class.
Student success coaches. Study hall twice a week. Yes. Things like that. Yeah.
And what are some of these qualifiers that you ask? You said there were, 1 or 2, 5 to 6. Yeah. What are some of these qualifiers?
We ask, so when discussing whether or not students are at risk, there's sort of general qualifiers, and we like to get to know them, sort of like what was their experiences like growing up? What kind of music program do they have at their high school? Would you consider yourself having come from like a stable home? Not, I don't word it like that, but I mean, just getting them to maybe open up a little bit about what their upbringing was like from birth to age 18.
Are you a first generation college student? Do you find your family to be supportive of your musical goals? What are your musical goals?
Right. That's when then we have questions that are more music specific. And that's, what are your musical goals? Have you had any applied lessons? Did your high school have a choral program? What are your expectations for yourself in your career? What are your family's expectations of you? Things like that.
There's so much there personal to get to know that student, but also to know how you can best serve them, because it is so not one size fits all. And I love that what you're doing is individualized. Question though, who actually goes through all of these questionnaires and who becomes the point person for each student?
The academic, not the academic coach, the academic advisor.
Okay.
Yes. Or the applied lesson advisor, whoever we feel like would be the best personality fit for the students. There's some students that start off with me because I'm their applied lesson teacher, but then we quickly realize that it's just not a great fit personality wise. And then we move them over to Jerron, who's our academic advisor, and that's a better fit. I think it just requires so much flexibility, and it depends on the student.
And then how do you track it? Like, that seems like so much. I mean, we all do a million things anyway, but how do you manage this extra workload, which is so necessary and important?
Spreadsheets.
Well, you know, we use everyone's favorite Google form. So the first thing is like, if they ever fill out anything in Google form, we make sure it gets dumped into a spreadsheet.
Right? It's in Google form. It's shared amongst all the applied teachers and all the advisors. And then we just regularly do check-in meetings with the full-time faculty. We're really careful to make sure that we don't violate any FERPA, but it's just check-in to make sure that if we're seeing a behavior that is not going amongst all the other classes. So like if there's a lot of times one small behavior that we may see in applied lessons will be crossed over in theory, and then the week later it'll cross over into music history, you know, so we're
recognizing patterns as they start.
As students start to develop, you know, students do really great and then they start to fall off, and then we need to grab on a little tighter. It just takes constant communication amongst all of the faculty.
So is that something that you've had to build as a culture in the faculty as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's
been hard and it's been challenging, and faculty have pushed back and sort of said, well, I don't have time to do this. And I said, well, we need students, right? We talk about retention. This is how we're going to retain students. So we either do the work and help them and meet them where they are, or we're just not going to have a program.
And it becomes such a part of not just the retention, but the recruitment, to know that you have that one-on-one access. I mean, you were just talking about being in the country of multiple schools. Yeah. That is something that is so unique and special to you. Our school is similar in size, and so that one-on-one attention is special, but the tracking is not yet there in our department, and it's something we're talking about all the time. So can we talk about the tracking? I'm assuming that you guys decided the Google Forms, Google Document, Google Spreadsheet thing. What other resources are you using to keep it all organized?
Well, we're really lucky. Our school has a really great support system of academic coaches, like student success coaches. And we have like a reporting system. It's called EARS, Early Alert Reporting System. So we can communicate with them anytime we see even the smallest change of behavior. Suddenly wearing pajamas to class, like things that you really don't think are that big of a deal, and you just say it's just students, you know, could be the start of a student starting to fall off. So anytime we see any behavior like that, we report it to the student success coach so they can check in with the student, because they can talk to the student in much more personal ways than we can as faculty. And then we just really communicate. We're really lucky that we have really great leaders in our music area. Jerron is one of them, but he's a co-coordinator. And we all sincerely, truly care about these students and are willing to just be there for them, always. None of us just want to check in and leave. we're there for them.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like it's value-based too, then, back to your personal philosophy. That's something we talk about all the time. And I love that summer is a time to evaluate what are your values and your philosophies, to then bounce your musical planning and your calendar planning and your scaffolding for each individual student. That's such an important time of the year.
I mean, you really have to decide, every educator has to decide for themselves, like, what some people view higher ed as like we're gatekeepers, right? But I don't like to think of that higher education as we are the gatekeepers. So if you remove that mentality from like really the culture that I think has developed in higher ed over the past however many centuries, you start to see the student itself, rather than thinking of yourself as like being there to make sure that whether or not someone is worthy to enter into the field. It's like, well, maybe I'm not here to decide their worthiness. Maybe I'm here to help make sure that they get there. Whatever there is, whatever the level is that this student needs in skill and in knowledge to be successful as a music educator, rather than me determining they're not, I need to help them become it.
And when we look at traditionally marginalized communities that are labeled as at risk, right? First generation students, we often think that they just haven't been given the opportunity. So for me, when I see them, it's not about I want them to meet these skill levels. Yes, I want them when they graduate to graduate the same skill set that I graduated with, the highest level of musicianship that they can obtain. But also what's important is there are so many schools in our area that don't have teachers, right? And who says that these students, just because they may not be as good of a musician as me or as good of a singer as I was, that they don't deserve to have these jobs to continue on educating so we can stop this cycle. And them getting a 4-year degree would be life-changing for them, for their families, and for the people around them, for their communities. And I think that's what we have to remember and what's important.
And I love how what you're demonstrating through your actions, through your careful planning, is also showing them how to care for their students.
Exactly. And we talk about that a lot. And that is actually one of our goals, that we start with the freshmen and it's not coddling, but we keep them close and we really work hard to build the skills. So then when they're juniors and seniors, like, these students, they are awesome. They are teaching our younger students how to do it. And they feel like they have the tools to go out and be successful teachers because we're teaching them how to teach.
And I'm always using with my music ed majors verbiage that's forward thinking. Like, when you're a teacher, X, Y, and Z, you're going to want to do this. When you're a teacher, it's not like a maybe or what if, and if you pass and if you graduate. It's like, no, when you become a teacher, you're going to need this. So I think it helps them visualize themselves in that position 4 years from now.
And it inspires them. We just did senior exit interviews and sophomore reviews, and so many of them said, we said, what are your career goals? And so many of them said they wanted to be at Title I schools. So for them, they want to do the work that we are doing because they see that it's important and possible.
That's beautiful. And I think, Jerron, you just tapped on something that Christi said earlier, the verbiage and the language that you use. So you're using empowering language and you're giving them the tools and the resources instead of saying, you don't have this, try this. What are some of the other language things that you use?
So that is one of the things that I feel like I'm super passionate about, is like how I speak to my students. So like when you go into talking about like collegiate athletics, right? You go in and there's like massive murals of guys with like sweat dripping off their bodies.
Perseverance.
And power and strength and discipline. And just like the words are everywhere. And the coaches are every time I would see a coach, you're like, McLain, what are you doing today? What are you doing today to be a better person? It's just like, it's this really intense environment of you can't have a bad day because you're always working to do better, if that makes sense. And so that's sort of what my philosophy is. And I found that when I was around that, I was able to power through my practice sessions at the end of my day, because I was there in grad school. I was like, you know what? I can go learn 10 pages of a Mozart aria. Yes. And so I kind of like take that. And every time I have FaceTime with my students, as a faculty member, as music faculty, we decide what is our word for the year. So like discipline. Last year, our word was discipline. This is every time we have FaceTime, we're going to talk to our students. What does discipline mean? What are discipline actions? And what can we do every day that is even the smallest level of discipline? And so then every time we see them, what'd you do? What'd you do today? That's a discipline act. Or anytime you're in front of the choir, you're talking about discipline. And then they love it so much that when they see them, they're like, were you disciplined this morning, Dr. McLain? Did you get up and go for your run? So
I love that. They toss it right back at you. That shows so much rapport.
Exactly. Which is so important to these students. They need to know that they are supported and cared for. And because then if they don't feel like you support and believe in them, they're not going to believe in themselves. So like this year, just because of what we got, there was a lot of like, what are you doing to care for yourself? It was self-care. What is your
so you're also modeling it and being there for their questions. So I want to throw a devil's advocate question at you. What is this spoon feeding? I know this is something that comes up in a lot of our meetings in our university from some of my colleagues. Like, I don't want to spoon feed, quote unquote. That is not my quote. I will spoon feed all day to give you the steps you need to scaffold to your non-spoon feeding self. But what is your response to, well, you're spoon feeding?
We walked into a program where they were spoon fed. For sure, 100%. They came into their lessons and the teacher sat behind the piano and flunked out their notes.
Yeah, and that's we could tell with the students that we were working with right away, like, oh, you're expecting me to sit here and just teach the music to you. Like that was sort of the expectation of the relationship.
Yeah, so for us, it's building the skills. So for different students, it may be, we're going to give you 30 minutes with a pianist at the very beginning of the semester, and you can make recordings. You can make recordings of your accompaniment. You can make a few recordings, and it depends on the student, and we decide which students are eligible for this. Maybe they get their notes flunked out, and it's a recording, and it's done one time. No notes are flunked out in lessons, in applied lessons with us.
You have to talk about that app you shared at the Philosophy Con, where you help them break down, like, how do they even know what to practice in the practice room?
So we use this really awesome app called Modacity. It was a big struggle to get students used to using it, right? And now that they have used it for several semesters, it is literally their favorite thing ever. So you can go in, and I'm really detail-oriented with my goals. So every single lesson, we have 5 or 6 goals, and they're very small goals. So it's like, I'm going to sing measures 7 through 8 in my Italian piece on and off. And that's it, whatever it may be. So we can go in and I can create a playlist in there, and it tells them exactly how long they should be practicing it. What specifically, all of my students get the Estelle Liebling books, which is something that is not often given in applied voice lessons, method books. I think that's something that's normal in instrumental world, but not so much in the vocal world. So they all start with the Estelle Liebling vocal course, and they know every single week what exercises they're going to start with, and we slowly build up. So then by the end of the year, they can sing all of the exercises. And so this app, and then it tracks it. They can record themselves. They write notes at the end of how they felt about their practice session. And for me, it's about quality, not quantity. So I actually encourage them to do shorter practice sessions, not longer ones. And then they can share it with me, and then I can hear their practicing. So
what's that app called one more time? Modacity. And what I love that you said at the beginning is something that ties into everything. Change is hard. It is so hard. It's hard for us, and we're all very motivated humans.
Yes.
Change is hard no matter what it looks like. It's so
hard. And there's so many times throughout this process, like Jerron said, we're finishing our 4th year, and every single year we make tweaks, we add things, we change things. And when we start something new, we just think, that was a disaster. This is a disaster. we can't, but we're already in it, and we commit ourselves to a full year of something before we decide whether or not it's
we're gonna like do a new app or something like that.
And I just remember I was like, this Modacity, the students can't figure it out. I feel like I waste so much time teaching them all the time, but now they know it.
And they are obviously getting stuff out of it.
Yes. And my juniors and seniors now can create their own playlist. Like, as they keep the Modacity app up on their iPad, and as we go through lessons and we go through different things, I'm like, can you add this to your playlist? And we just go, and it takes 30 seconds out of the lesson. So,
and then that can then become something they teach to the younger ones that come in, the freshmen, sophomores. And look at that life skill. They get out in the real world and they need to accomplish a task. They now know how to break down a task.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things that I think I took for granted, at least as a young musician, is that slowly but surely learning that that's how you become better at something, right? And music is such a good way of learning that skill. And I just knew that by the time I got to college from all of my prior musical experiences. But then I realized, but if other people haven't maybe had those experiences, maybe they're not aware that they can use music to teach them that skill for whatever field they end up going into. And I wanted to just go back to mention this. When you were talking about like change is hard, it's funny because you would think when students come into college, that's already a big change, right? The worst time to throw anything new at them because they're overloaded and overwhelmed. But I've actually found that's the best time because it's sort of like they wiped the slate clean. You don't want to wait too long, and then they get too comfortable with however they're doing something, which may be the wrong way of doing it. So it's best we find to just try and give them as much of the info and the tools and things as we can right away. And then they don't know college could be any different because that's just how they learn to survive in college.
Okay, so walk me through it. I'm a freshman. I'm coming in. I want to say too, before we keep going, understanding that there are so many lived experiences. I love that this conversation is forcing all of us to pause and think of all the different lived experiences that are coming to us as freshmen. And that is something that is a whole nother point of conversation. And I'm so thankful we are in a field that we get to work with a variety of students. But I love that what you've created is already on a spectrum to serve all different types of people. And I love that about it. But let's pretend I'm a freshman and I am a first gen high risk. What does my first week on campus with you look like?
Well, thankfully, our students all get, we're like a one-to-one school, but it's with iPads. So we try to set up meetings early on with our students, both one-on-one as their advisors.
Yeah, so they're meeting with us probably 3 or 4 times, whoever their advisor, their person is, right? That we have decided would be the best fit personality wise from what we can tell with the student. So they're coming on campus, we're making sure they have their books. We're just checking in. And these are not walking them to the bookstore. It's just, you see them and you say, or send them a text and you say, hey, did you get your books from the bookstore? Did you make it to your class today? You know, it's really basic, like, let's just show up for life right now. And then at the end of the week, let's gather all of our syllabi, and we're all going to sit down together, all of our freshmen, and we create semester calendars. It is like my favorite thing ever.
That was my favorite part of school.
Yeah. Yes. No, me too. And, you know, I bring out all of my colored pens, and some students really love to just write because at this point they're a little too overwhelmed to really introduce too much new technology like Google Calendar. But that really comes in second semester. But first semester, we get out our colored pencils and we get snacks and we sit down and I teach them how to write a semester calendar. So all of their major dates are in there. We talk about how long they should be in the practice room, how often they need to be in the practice room. When are we going to study? When is the best time for you to study? Are you a morning person? Are you a nighttime person? Most of the time they don't know themselves well enough to know those answers. So I give them ideas like, well, how about tonight? Let's try doing your practice session maybe at like 7. And I want you to send me an email and let me know how that went for you.
How cool.
And then the next day we do the morning, you know. So it's really just making sure we've given them the skills and the tools to be successful just in the very beginning, right? Get to class, get in your practice sessions. Do you have your books? Do you have everything you need to be a student?
But you also are giving them the like paper version in the fall and transitioning them to the online version.
Yeah.
Jerron, were you going to say something?
Oh yeah, well, and then like after that initial sort of onslaught of info and stuff, then we try to just kind of let them have a little bit of time being a student before we like do any kind of check-in with them. So we're not gonna meet with them every week right away.
Yes.
But then it's important that not too far into the semester, like not even maybe just a couple weeks into the semester, I try to meet with all of my students as their advisors, and I'm like, okay, so let's just check in and see how everything's going. How are your practice sessions going? How are your classes going? Are you finding that your homework is built into your schedule now that you're kind of are you in a that's what I'm looking for, like, are you in a routine with your classes, or are there things that are being let go? Before it's too late, let's talk about what's being let go and let's see how we can fit those into your routine that you started to develop.
Yeah. And it's really important to not be, to be non-emotional about this and to be supportive across the board, even if they're saying, well, I haven't been to class in a week and a half, or I have zeros in my blackboard, whatever it may be, to make sure that they know that you're not just going to praise them for the good work, and you're not going to just discipline them or lecture them for whatever bad work is, and then guide them to see where they are in this cycle to make changes in their life. So let's say they're kind of tanking in the first couple of weeks of classes, asking them, what do you think is going well, and what do you think you can improve upon, and see if they can even identify what they need to improve upon. Some of them may not be able to, and if they can, then moving into, well, so what can we do to make better actions, to make better choices, and making sure that they are making the choices for themselves, and we're not just spoon feeding them. We're giving them questions to ask themselves, so they can motivate themselves and have this self-efficacy to make changes.
You showed a really great diagram in your presentation both times. What was that diagram called?
It's called the cycle of sorry, I'm trying to it's stages of change.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And so it's a 5-step circle, and it's just this idea that like it helps you sort of track where any individual with any given topic, but we're using it obviously for our students, where they are maybe in their preparedness to make a change, whatever that change may be. You can really apply it to anything, big or small.
You can apply that to a piece of music.
Exactly.
Choir, where are we on this circle right now? What do we need to do to get to the next stage?
Exactly. So it's, like pre-contemplation, do they have no intent of ever making a change, and they're just here. And it's really great to understand when students are in that stage, because we can rest easy knowing that no amount of pressuring or pushing or tools
motivation
that we give them is going to make them make a change. And we have students that are there, even though we've given them all of the support, they don't make it, and it's heartbreaking and sad, but we can rest easy knowing that it wasn't because we didn't support them.
Right. And you never know when that seed that you planted will grow.
No.
Oh, exactly.
And students come back years later, and they come back to school, and they realize that's something that they need to do, and they graduate, they do it. So you just never know when you're going to make a difference. And then there's contemplation and preparation and action and maintenance, and students just kind of like move all over the wheel. Sometimes they jump stages, sometimes they will come in and they don't think they have an issue, and then they go and they talk to their friends, or they sleep on it, and they come in and they're sort of like, okay, Dr. McLain, I guess I need to make better choices. I don't really know what to do. And so we have longer discussions then about actions that they could take.
I love that. Will you make sure I get a link to that so I can put it in episode notes? That would be so good. You guys are fabulous at making documents and things that are helpful. I do want to tell you, after I heard you present this November of 19, that I went and changed my syllabi for all of my classes. So I teach non-music majors a variety of classes. Like I design new music ed and music history classes every year. So like rock and roll, film score, that type of stuff. But in the first week of the Welcome to the Syllabus overview, one of their assignments is show me what your week looks like and when you're doing the work for this class and when things are due. So I copied that from y'all, and it has been a game changer.
Yes. It is so great. Students don't realize that they need to plan out when to do the work.
Yeah.
Right. And they always reference it. Like they reference that at the end every year. Like, what's one thing you learned from this class that you'll take with you into the world? I learned that if I put things on my calendar, it gets done.
Yeah.
Praise Jesus.
Right? I mean, and that's what we always tell them. They were like, we're teaching you to be professionals. This is going to be required of you.
Yeah.
And it's fun to see like the variety of that assignment. Like some people just, put it in their phone reminders, and some people have multicolor coded epic calendars that they send you pictures of. But to see the spectrum, you get to know so much about your students in that one little assignment. So that's one way I've applied it. Can we switch and think if people listening right now, whether they are at the college level or they're high school teachers or middle school teachers or they're elementary or have community ensembles or church, what are some ideas or tips or tools that you would say would easily transfer to their situations?
So, I mean, the whole basis, I think, for this work that we're doing is just developing the relationship with the individual, right? And yes, that's time consuming, especially if you're at a program that's got 250 kids in your choir. But even in a program where you've got 250 kids, everyone still has that same basic need of like feeling like they're connected to their teacher at some level. And
go for it.
Oh yeah. And so I think one of the things that that Christi took away from her time in the NCAA that we tried to work with is the motivational interviewing aspect, which is when you do get that time to meet one-on-one with someone and have that interaction with them, how are you going to use that time? What are you going to say to them? What questions are you going to ask them that's going to get the information you need to help them go through that cycle of change? Because we all have things we're working on. We all, even us, as professors, are working on things, and we all are at different areas of that cycle of change for different things. And so it's our goal to just basically help them identify where they are and what they need to do to get X, Y, or Z across the finish line.
And I think for me is don't assume anyone knows everything, or not even everything, just maybe even knows the most basic skill that comes to us as second nature, right? We know what a quarter note is. We've known it our whole life, what we think, but it was taught to us at one time. And we can't assume that everyone has had that same educational background. So what seems obvious to us may not be obvious to the person sitting next to us or across from us or in the desk. So giving every single student the opportunity by giving them the tools. So we have the solfege ladders for students available. We have, what are some of the other,
just like creating rhythm trees, any sort of supplementary materials that I think someone who is coming in to my class or my ensemble, assuming they've had no prior exposure to any of this stuff. So it's like a life raft for them to help them survive in that setting from day one.
Sounds like my adult choir. Like my little adult choir loves whenever I give them some type of manipulative to learn something. They're like, I've been singing for 50 years and I didn't know that was a thing. Yeah. And it feels good.
It does. And it just makes them feel, sometimes I think classical music can feel very isolating for people that don't know much about it. Right? It can feel not attainable. And that's the last thing we want, right? We want to be building a passion for this music that we have decided is our life's work. And we have to not be snobby about it and be like, well, you should know how to do this. You are a music major. For me, if a student can't do something, in my head, I'm computing backwards and I'm saying, did I give them the tool? Did I give them the tool for this? Should they know this? And if I didn't, then I need to backtrack and I need to do that back work and make sure they have been given the tools. And if they did give them the tool, what's happening that they're not showing up and doing the work for themselves?
Where are they on that circle?
Yes. And are they pulling themselves up the scaffolding? Did I build the scaffolding for them to climb?
Oh, I build the scaffolding? I might have to change the title of our,
Yeah.
I might just have to change the title. Did I build the scaffolding for them to climb? Oh, every song. Okay, 2 quick questions. Are you guys book readers?
Mm-hmm.
Have you read Daniel Pink's, the book is called When?
No.
Oh, you would love it. In the opening chapter, it labels everyone as like when they do their best work, and I'm a lark. I wake up really early. It's
I need to
so
read
good.
this.
It's Daniel Pink. It's When, the science of when you're at your best. Great read, super fast. I think it was published in 17 or 18. And then another book I thought of. You were giving all the motivational quotes on the wall of the NCAA. Glennon Doyle wrote a book last year called Untamed.
Yeah.
And have you read that one? And she talks about how she walked into the bathroom where her 2 kids have showers, and she was stealing her shampoo back. And like on one side of the shower where all the men's soaps was like powerful, dynamic, whatever. And then it was these little slim, beautiful things for the women. But like, come on.
Right.
I think that the words you put out there and the culture that you're facilitating, it takes work and time.
You said like you are like the 5 things you surround yourself with the most, right? Mm-hmm. And it's that idea that just mentally and emotionally, whatever we feed ourselves up here in our brains,
what we feed our students. If we're constantly telling them, you don't know this, you don't know that, why aren't you working hard enough, why aren't you doing that, they in their head then start to tell themselves, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. And I think everyone, educators across the boards, can see that we have so many more mental illnesses in our students and mental, like emotional capacities that they're dealing with, that especially through the pandemic, so many of our students struggle with performance anxiety, and they just don't think that they're worthy. And just having this constant conversations that you are worthy of this, and you are worthy to teach other people how to do this. And it's important they believe in themselves.
That's how they beat the odds. That's so good, full circle. And then one more book. I'm sorry. I'm such a reader. I'm such a bookworm.
Love it.
Darren Hardy, The Compound Effect. Have you read that one?
No.
It has a beautiful, there's a couple analogies. I love it because it's repetitive, and as you're reading the book, the concepts really stick. But the idea is everything compounds upon itself to reach your goals. And so the first analogy he gives is priming the pump. Back in the day, you would have to sit there and prime that pump forever before water comes out. And it's a great analogy. You spend all this time in the beginning creating that, priming that pump, and then once the water's flowing, you have to practice different strategies. How often do you have to pump it to keep the water going at the consistency at which you need it?
That's brilliant. That's exactly what it is. You do.
So that's one of my favorites. And then the other analogy is the glass in your brain. We all have a beautiful glass in our brain. And your goal, like, you are at your best when the water in your glass is clear. So what are you fogging up your glass with? What are you dirtying your glass with in your brain? What are you listening to or filling it with, or what words? It's a fantastic read. I recommend it to all my seniors. I have like a book list I recommend before they student teach. I'm like, if you have time, I'll book club with you.
Right.
That is brilliant. I love it. I know what I'm doing this summer.
Yeah.
Oh, girl, if you want to read any of those books, I will unpack any and all of them with you. I would read any of them again.
Perfect. I love it. I mean, it's just exactly like the work that we're doing.
And it fills us to overflowing, so we can then come up with these great ideas like you guys have come up with. Oh, we could talk forever, but I always let the guests give the listener like one thing that really matters. And you've given us so many things, but what is the one thing you want them to walk away with?
I feel like you hit the nail on the head. We shouldn't just assume that and this could go for anything in life, right? We shouldn't just assume that anyone knows something or take anything for granted. And at the end of the day, I mentioned this earlier, and I keep coming back to this, that like we have to stop thinking of ourselves in education at any level as gatekeepers, but instead, if the bar is here, we're not there to determine whether or not who meets the bar. We're there to help them reach the bar. And it's just that shift in mentality, I think, for me, when I was first starting as a teacher, really helped reframe my expectations, not for my students, but for myself, my expectations for myself as their teacher.
Yeah. And I think for me, it's like everyone deserves a chance. Everyone deserves a chance. They might not show up, they might not rise to the occasion, but more often than not, if someone believes in them and gives them opportunity and tools, they will rise to the occasion.
This has been great. Thank you for sharing all of your hard work and for being willing to come on the podcast. This is third time seeing you guys talk about your stuff, and I'm still super stoked.
Well, thank you so much for having us. You know, when we started doing this work, we did not think it would be interesting to anyone. We really were just here to support our students, and we didn't feel like we had the tools. And I was like, I'm such a concrete person and so organized that I'm like, I need to know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing to support them. So it really was selfish that we created this so we could better support. So thank you for helping us share our passion and our work.
Well, and we'd love to hear from people.
I have your both of your websites are on the episode notes, and I can throw your emails in there too if you want that.
Please, yeah.
Great. We don't. Wonderful.
Many of these things aren't our ideas. They're just things that we've collected from other people that are much smarter than we are. Yeah. And we love to hear new ideas and want to know like what's working or what's not working at other institutions at any level.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Emily.
The words you use matter. What you put in your brain matters. The steps on the ladder that you create for them to reach and achieve and surpass the bar, it matters. I'm so thankful that you have listened to this episode. I hope that you took something away from it. Let me know. Jump over onto Instagram, put a little message in there. You can also hit me up, emilybirch.org/contact, or better yet, join the conversation and get monthly episodes and all the extra stuff over at patreon.com/musicedmatters. In fact, we have an entire professional development weekend coming up, both live and virtually. Live in Savannah, Georgia, and virtually coming up. You can check out all those details at patreon.com/musicedmatters. I hope that you feel motivated and empowered. You are making such a difference in the world. We all know that music matters. And I'll see you next time on the Music Ed Matters podcast.